Hello, welcome. Today I'd like to talk about the idea that entry into God's house is non transactional in nature. There is no quid pro quo when dealing with God. In all stories and folklore and tales of the devil, those dealings with the devil are on the basis of quid pro quo. God is not the devil, therefore, God is not based on quid pro quo. In fact, all are welcome into God's house. This way of thinking about your relationship with God has consequences. Number one, it puts what you do or don't do towards your relationship with God in your court, in your responsibility. Whether you do things for God or not, it should be on the basis because you want to, not because you have to. Another consequence of this way of thinking is that you cannot, by definition, go around condemning people to an eternity of hell. A thing that happens far too frequently with people following a religion. I'm not really sure how anyone reads religious texts, and the outcome that they get from those texts are to condemn people to an eternity of misery and suffering. Let's go ahead and look at some of these ideas a little more closely and see how we can become closer to God and better to other people when we understand that entry into God's house is for all. As I just stated, all are welcome into God's house. Well, is that true? It may be. But this way of thinking does have some very powerful ramifications. The first and foremost is perhaps an objection that we would have in this way of thinking. And that objection is, well, I guess I don't need to do anything. Which you would be correct and accurate for stating that. I would think you would want to do things for God because you want to, not because you have to. When you do things because you have to, that tends to be a subjugator, subjugated relationship. Right? So take either how you treat your children or how you were treated as a child. You did things because you were told to, because you had to. You tell your children to do things because they have to. They have no choice in the matter. They don't get to choose how to serve you, right? Rightfully so, they're children. However, you as an adult may or may not have kept that framework in life when you chose to serve God. Have you chose to serve God on the basis of what others tell you you have to do? Or do you choose to serve God by that which you come to your own conclusions based on how you would best like to serve God? And that's what I'm saying. What I think is the best thing that we can all do is serve God because we want to, not because we have to. Well, that's easier said than done. How do you get there? Well, you understand that entry into God's house is welcome to all. With this way of thinking, then you can only do things for God that you want to, and not because you have to. And so these motivations for your actions, that means they only come out of love and endearment and betterment, not out of some sort of forced obligation, guilt, remorse, pity, all out of all these negative kind of thinkings. Does God want subjects? Does God want people to do things because they believe they have to? I wouldn't think so. I'd be very surprised if this was the case. I'm not claiming to know God, but I would have to suspect if you created the whole universe and all life, why would you want people to just bow down before you? Wouldn't you want people to worship you freely as they choose and see fit? Or not worship you at all if they choose and see fit? Right? You gave them life and free will for... Why would you do that? Why would you give somebody free will if your end game was to have them worship you? Yeah, I think it's very important to do things for God because you want to, not because you have to, because you love God. Now, what is the right thing to do for God? I don't know. That's going to be what's right for you. Probably get into that in another video in more detail. But in this video, understand that what's more important than words and actions are your motivations for those words and actions. Where did they come from? Was guilt your driving force? Anger, lust, greed, pity? So was it good or bad emotions? Did you genuinely just want to do the right thing because it was the right thing to do? This is the highest order good that we can all do. So if you truly believe that all are welcome into God's house, that means now all your good actions that you do in the world are solely motivated by doing good. They're not motivated by earning enough spiritual currency or something to, trade that to get into God's house or to, overcome, your bad deeds or something like that. So this idea is very powerful, and it puts the responsibility on you. It puts the ball in your court. And just as I've applied this way of thinking for myself, it put the ball in my court. It put the responsibility on me. In that, well, I know that I'm saved and there's nothing I can do for that end, but does that mean I just sit around and do nothing my whole life? Or go and, sin through, lust, greed, envy, and so forth. No. I think God is love and beauty, and, you should want to do things for God, right? So imagine this. You have, it's Mother's Day or Father's Day, and as a child, what are you going to give to your parent for Mother's Day or Father's Day? And let's say your mother or father has everything they can need or want, materially speaking. They're well off. So what do you do? Do you just go buy them a thing? Probably not. And even if they aren't well off, you as a child, you don't have much or any money of your own. So what do? You do something thoughtful for them. You do an act of love and kindness that shows that you put some thought and effort into it. And sure can be your parent is genuinely happy with this. And maybe this is the correct way of looking to do things for God. So doing things that we want to do out of love, not that we have to do out of some sort of obligation that we think we need. The other idea is to not condemn people to an eternity of hell, which, if you do believe that all are welcome into God's house, then how can you possibly condemn people to an eternity of pain and suffering? I'm not entirely certain how anyone reads a religious text and comes to the conclusion that it's a good idea to condemn people to an eternity of pain and misery and suffering. I've not even gone to a religious teaching that is the case, yet people who claim to follow these things end up doing exactly that all too often. Some, if it's, you're not following my religion, you're going to hell. Others is you're just a bad person, you're going to hell. Others, you're not following any religion, you're going to hell. Some people, if you're born before a certain time, you're going to hell. So anyway, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, people have been, condemned towards, an eternity of pain and misery and suffering by others all too frequently. And that needs to stop. And the good news is, you can stop this. You can be totally free of that way of thinking. You will no longer be in danger of even suspecting to condemn somebody to an eternity of hell. Assuming you honestly believe that all are welcome into God's house. Now, we are given free will, and you are, of course, given the free will to exist outside of God, if you choose, and that's what I will be defining hell as, is existing outside of God. And if you so choose to exist outside of God, as in you choose to exclude yourself from God's house, well, you have free will, and you have the power to do that. I would advise against it, of course. I would hope you would not want to do that. I will be going into greater depth in this idea in a future video. But for now, suffice it to say, you should be doing acts for God because you want to. You should not be condemning others to hell. God is not the devil, so God is not transactional in nature to think you need to buy your way into heaven or to say certain things or believe certain things. I mean, at that point, God is just kind of petty, I would think, or to really micromanage how you believe in God. Well, of course, God is not petty. People are petty, and people have taken God's word and turned it into a tool for subjugation. It seems like. So, take the power back into your own hands. Do things for God because you want to, not because you have to. Don't just sit around and say, "Oh, I'm saved," and that's the end of that. The do nothing model for salvation. Yes, I agree. You are saved. I will not be the one to condemn you to hell. You condemn yourself to hell through your own free will. It's your choice to live outside of God's house. But don't you love God? Don't you just want to do things for God? For the sake of doing good things? Well, I would hope so. And I would encourage you to do those things. And what things are those? Well, that's the greatest part of all. That's for you to think and do whatever you think is really good. That's for your personal relationship between you and God. I'm not here to micromanage you and tell you, you need to do this and you need to not do that. I will say I think you should, think for yourself and come to your own conclusion about how you personally can best serve God. And, and one of the tools to help you best serve God is to understand that your actions should be motivated by that of love and not of obligation. Understand. All are welcome into God's house. Don't condemn others to hell. Do things for God because you want to, not because you have to.